Welcome back, sisters, in-law dynamics, and moving house. Oh my. Today we are covering chapters 4 through 6 of volume 1 in Sense and Sensibility. If you missed the first video, I would recommend going back just so that you know what happens in chapters 1 through 3 unless you're an expert. And in that case, you would know more than me. That's one of my disclaimers. I'm not an expert. I'm just a big lover of Jane Austen. If you want more information on my background or a little mini literary history lesson on the book itself, and I mean mini, then go back and watch the first one and join us. I read through this. I read through each chapter. We discuss as we go, and then I have little discussion questions after that if you want to comment down below and join in on the discussion. I'm trying to think of a different word. Oh boy. It's a good thing we learn a lot of new vocabulary in these books. I am just going to get started. We're just going to get going with chapter 4. Okay, I'm Shannon, by the way. Hi. What a pity it is, Elinor, said Marianne, that Edward should have no taste for drawing. No taste for drawing, replied Elinor. Why should you think so? He does not draw himself, indeed, but he has great pleasure in seeing the performances of other people, and I assure you he is by no means deficient in natural taste, though he has not had opportunities of improving it. Had he ever been in the way of learning, I think he would have drawn very well. He distrusts his own judgment in such matters so much that he is always unwilling to give his opinion on any picture, but he has an innate propriety and simplicity of taste, which in general direct him perfectly right. I love getting insight on Edward from Elinor, and also he really just sounds like the sweetest. Marianne was afraid of offending and said no more on the subject, but the kind of approbation which Elinor described as excited in him by the drawings of other people was very far from the rapturous delight which, in her opinion, could alone be called taste. Yet, though smiling within herself at the mistake, she honored her sister for that blind partiality to Edward which produced it. She's like, I know you love him, babe. I'm not going to get mad at you because of the things that I find silly or flawed in him. I hope, Marianne, continued Elinor, you do not consider him as deficient in general taste. Indeed, I think I may say that you cannot, for your behavior to him is perfectly cordial, and if that were your opinion, I am sure you could never be civil to him. Marianne hardly knew what to say. She would not wound the feelings of her sister on any account, and yet to say that she did not believe was impossible. At length she replied, do not be offended, Elinor, if my praise of him is not in everything equal to your sense of his merits. I have not had so many opportunities of estimating the minuter propensities of his mind, his inclinations and tastes, as you have. But I have the highest opinion in the world of his goodness and sense. I think him everything that is worthy and amiable. I am sure, replied Elinor with a smile, that his dearest friends could not be dissatisfied with such commendation as that. I do not perceive how you could express yourself more warmly. Marianne was rejoiced to find her sister so easily pleased. Of his sense and goodness, continued Elinor, no one can, I think, be in doubt, who has seen him often enough to engage him in unreserved conversation. The excellence of his understanding and his principles can be concealed only by that shyness which too often keeps him silent. You know enough of him to do justice to his solid worth. But of his minuter propensities, as you call them, you have from peculiar circumstances been kept more ignorant than myself. He and I have been at times thrown a good deal together, while you may have been my eyes. While you have been wholly engrossed on the most affectionate principle by my mother. I have seen a great deal of him, have studied his sentiments, and heard his opinion on subjects of literature and taste, and upon the whole, I venture to pronounce that his mind is well informed, his enjoyment of books exceedingly great, his imagination lively, his observation just and correct, and his taste delicate and pure. His abilities in every respect improve as much upon acquaintance as his manners and person. At first, his address is certainly not striking, so address would be like manner of speaking. At first sight, his address is certainly not striking, and his person can hardly be called handsome, till the expression of his eyes, which are uncommonly good, and the general sweetness of his countenance is perceived. At present, I know him so well that I think him really handsome, or at least I almost do. What say you, Marianne? I have so much to say about this one paragraph of insight that we get into Elinor. And also, this is the first time we hear Elinor speak in the novel. And it's really her showing her heart, which is not what she's necessarily known for, which I find very interesting. So, about this paragraph, she's kind of telling on herself here. And we'll come to find in just a second that Marianne is like, oh my God, you love him. But I also find the sentence interesting where she says, I know him so well that I think him really handsome, or at least I almost do. So despite his, maybe lack of beauty or just like typical handsomeness. She's like, I know him so well, clearly from this paragraph, that I really, I like him. Or, he is beautiful to me now that I know his heart more. How you perceive someone can affect their attractiveness for some people. And I think that's a really interesting insight to Elinor here. Marianne replies, I shall very soon think him handsome, Elinor, if I do not now. When you tell me to love him as a brother, I shall no more see imperfection in his face than I now do in his heart. So when she says, when you tell me to love him as a brother, she means marriage. Elinor started at this declaration and was sorry for the warmth she had been betrayed into in speaking of him. She felt that Edward stood very high in her opinion. She believed the regard to be mutual, but she required greater certainty of it to make Marianne's conviction of their attachment agreeable to her. She knew that what Marianne and her mother conjectured one moment, they believed the next, that with them, to wish was to hope, and to hope was to expect. She tried to explain the real state of the case to her sister. I do not attempt to deny, said she, that I think very highly of him, that I greatly esteem him, that I like him. Marianne here burst forth with indignation. Esteem him, like him, cold-hearted Elinor, oh, worse than cold-hearted, ashamed of being otherwise. Use those words again, and I will leave the room this moment. Elinor could not help laughing. Excuse me, said she, and be assured that I meant no offense to you by speaking in so quiet a way of my own feelings. Believe them to be stronger than I have declared. Believe them, in short, to be such as his merit and the suspicion, the hope of his affection for me may warrant, without imprudence or folly. But farther than this you must not believe. I am by no means assured of his regard for me. There are moments when the extent of it seems doubtful. Until his sentiments are fully known, you cannot wonder at my wishing to avoid any encouragement of my own partiality by believing or calling it more than it is. In my heart, I feel little, scarcely any doubt of his preference, but there are other points to be considered besides his inclination. He is very far from being independent. What his mother really is, we cannot know, but from Fanny's occasional mention of her conduct and opinions, we have never been disposed to think of her amiable. And I am very much mistaken if Edward is not himself aware that there would be many difficulties in his way if he were to wish to marry a woman who had not either a great fortune or high rank. So once again, Elinor being the level head, very eldest daughter here. This is so eldest daughter, how she immediately realizes that she was so vulnerable and she has to kind of snap back into place, and remember what her role is in being the one holding down the fort in the family. And when I first read this, I felt like a twinge in my heart. I'm an eldest daughter, and I immediately recognized what she was doing here. But she's like, yeah, I like Edward, and I'm pretty darn sure he likes me, but there's no way to be sure because he hasn't explicitly said it. And she's also saying that we know his mother, or he doesn't have access to his money. His mother has it, and she really wants him to marry well, from what they've heard from Fanny. And he very well may want to, maybe not want to in his heart, but he very well may need to marry someone of high rank or with a lot of money to please his family. Marianne was astonished to find how much the imagination of her mother and herself had outstripped the truth. And you are really not engaged to him, said she, yet it certainly soon will happen. But two advantages will proceed from this delay. I shall not lose you so soon, and Edward will have greater opportunity of improving that natural taste for your favorite pursuit, which must be so indispensably necessary for your future felicity. Oh, if he should be so far stimulated by your genius as to learn to draw himself, how delightful it would be. I'm sorry. She cracks me up. Marianne is like, so in her own little world. Sorry, I really need a sip of tea. Marianne, as we've learned, is not yet 17. She's 16. She's still very young. I think that's about 3 years younger than Elinor. But again, Elinor is the oldest daughter, and she recognizes in her mother and her sister, especially after their fathers passed away, that she really needs to be the grounded one. But Marianne here is so funny. She's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe like you're not engaged and that this is not happening." She's like, "But you know what? This works out for me because you'll stick around for longer. You'll, be here longer, and maybe Edward will learn to have some passion." Elinor had given her real opinion to her sister. She could not consider her partiality for Edward in so prosperous a state as Marianne had believed it. There was at times a want of spirits about him which, if it did not denote indifference, spoke of something almost as unpromising. A doubt of her regard, supposing him to feel it, need not give him more than inquietude or unease. It would not be likely to produce that dejection of mind which frequently attended him. A more reasonable cause might be found in the dependent situation which forbade the indulgence of his affection. She knew that his mother neither behaved to him so as to make his home comfortable at present, nor to give him any assurance that he might have a home for himself without strictly attending to her views for his aggrandizement, or his elevation or ennoblement. With such a knowledge as this, it was impossible for Elinor to feel easy on the subject. She was far from depending on that result of his preference of her, which her mother and sister still considered as certain. Nay, the longer they were together, the more doubtful seems the nature of his regard, and sometimes, for a few painful minutes, she believed it to be no more than friendship. We've all been there, girl. But whatever might really be its limits, it was enough, when perceived by his sister, to make her uneasy, and at the same time, which was more common, to make her uncivil. So we've had a little point of view swap here. We've gone from Elinor to his sister, which is Fanny, Edward's sister, and she doesn't like what's going on here. She, Fanny, took the first opportunity of affronting her mother-in-law on the occasion, talking to her so expressively of her brother's great expectations, comma, pause, Shannon, of Mrs. Ferrars's resolution that both of her sons should marry well, and of the danger attending any young woman who attempted to draw him in. That Mrs. Dashwood could neither pretend to be unconscious nor endeavor to be calm. So now we're in Mrs. Dashwood's point of view. She gave her an answer which marked her contempt, and instantly left the room, resolving that whatever might be the inconvenience or expense of so sudden a removal, her beloved Elinor should not be exposed another week to such insinuations. So Mrs. Dashwood is incredibly insulted by what Fanny has said about Edward, because she's insinuating that her daughter, Mrs. Dashwood, Elinor's daughter, Elinor, is not good enough for Edward. And she's like, we can't stay here. I'm screaming at me trying to explain these paragraphs. Tell me if I'm doing that too much or if it's helpful, because I can't tell. You tell me. In this state of her spirits, we're still in Mrs. Dashwood's point of view, a letter was delivered to her from the post, which contained a proposal particularly well timed. It was the offer of a small house on very easy terms, belonging to a relation of her own, a gentleman of consequence and property in Devonshire. The letter was from this gentleman himself, and written in true spirit of friendly accommodation. He understood that she was in need of a dwelling, and though the house he now offered was merely a cottage, he assured her that everything should be done to it which she might think necessary, if the situation pleased her. He earnestly pressed her, after giving the particulars of the house and garden, to come with her daughters to Barton Park, the place of his own residence, from whence she might judge herself whether Barton Cottage, for the houses were in the same parish, could, by any alteration, be made comfortable to her. He seemed really anxious to accommodate them, and the whole of his letter was written in so friendly a style as could not fail of giving pleasure to his cousin. Mrs. Cousin and him are Mrs. Dashwood and him are cousins. More especially at a moment when she was suffering under the cold and unfeeling behavior of her nearer connections, she needed no time for deliberation or inquiry. Her resolution was formed as she read. The situation of Barton, in a county so far distant from Sussex as Devonshire, which but a few hours before would have been a sufficient objection to outweigh every possible advantage belonging to the place, was now its first recommendation. To quit the neighborhood of Norland was no longer an evil, it was an object of desire. It was a blessing, in comparison of the misery of continuing her daughter-in-law's guest, and to remove forever from that beloved place would be less painful than to inhabit or visit it while such a woman was its mistress. She instantly wrote Sir John Middleton, this is the gentleman that's offering the home. She instantly wrote Sir John Middleton her acknowledgment of his kindness and her acceptance of his proposal, and then hastened to show both letters to her daughters, that she might be secure of their approbation before her answer were sent. So I think we went over it in the first video, but approbation, which we hear a lot, just means approval. Elinor had always thought it would be more prudent for them to settle at some distance from Norland than immediately amongst their present acquaintance. Prudent means wise. On that head, therefore, it was not for her to oppose her mother's intention of removing it to Devonshire. The house, too, as described by Sir John, was on so simple a scale, and the rent so uncommonly moderate, as to leave her no right of objection on either point. And therefore, though it was not a plan which brought any charm to her fancy, though it was a removal from the vicinity of Norland beyond her wishes, she made no attempt to dissuade her mother from sending her letter of acquiescence. or acceptance. Acquiescence is one of my favorite words to say and to look at. That is the end of chapter 4. So some things to go over for that last like major breaking news paragraph here. The ladies have a home, and it's Barton Cottage on in Barton Park, which is owned by Sir John Middleton, who is Mrs. Dashwood's cousin, and he is incredibly friendly, incredibly generous in offering this place to them. He's like, whatever you need, it's yours. Just please come and take advantage of what I can give you. And Mama, Mrs. Dashwood, is so desperate to get out of the house. She is literally like experiencing torture being around Fanny, her son's wife, her daughter-in-law, her half son. How does this? Not her stepson, her stepson. Anyway, she is so sick of being in the house with Fanny that she's like, literally, get me out of here. She's like, oh my God, it's really far away in Devonshire, which is like hours away from Sussex. Take me there. Yes. When before, like when they were still more acutely in their grief of losing their husband and father, or she was losing her husband, and then therefore losing her home. She's the lady of the house. She didn't want to leave Norland Park, but now she's like, get me out of here. And Elinor also doesn't love the idea of being so far from Norland, but she's like, the rent is going to be so cheap and there's literally no reason for us to decline. And I also underlined the line that says, though it was not a plan which brought any charm to her fancy, about Elinor, because I loved this little nod that Elinor is capable of whimsy and of fancy and of having opinions and loving things. There's just not necessarily room for her to lean into that. So in this chapter, we went over the dynamic between Elinor and Marianne a little bit. I'm curious as we go. I put a question on the first page of chapter 4 here. Who knows who better? And will we see that grow and change? I'm sure we will. But who do you think knows who better at this point, Elinor or Marianne? I think they both obviously know each other well. I think that age and maturity is a factor in who knows who better or who sees who more clearly. But I think that, it's going to be really fun to track their relationship and dynamic throughout the novel. We get more insight into Elinor through this chapter. We get to see her heart, and that's actually the first thing we see of Elinor before we meet her in dialogue with Marianne. We hear of her sense, and we hear of her making decisions that keep her family grounded and safe. But the first thing we hear her say in dialogue with Marianne is straight from her heart, and then we see in real time how she has to rein it back in because she kind of gave herself away, and that gives way to vulnerability, which is not helpful in what her role is in the family. And also, Fanny is playing a game here, like telling Mrs. Dashwood that she and her mother expect Edward and his brother to marry well, yada, yada, yada. She knows that Edward and Elinor are connecting. She knows what her words are going to do to Mrs. Dashwood. But given how civil and polite you seemingly had to be at this time, how would you handle living in a similar situation with Fanny? I think the ladies are doing very well considering how little they're allowed to react, how little they're allowed to talk back. How would you be handling that? I wouldn't be handling it well if I say so myself. Okay, let's move on to chapter 5. I can't wait to hear what all of your thoughts are. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I'm gonna take a sip of tea. God, at least they had tea though, right? I can just picture Elinor. Probably not Marianne, but I can picture Elinor like just getting a hot cup of tea and being like, my God, this is the best part of my day. Probably Mrs. Dashwood as well. Chapter 5. No sooner was her answer dispatched than Mrs. Dashwood indulged herself in the pleasure of announcing to her son-in-law and his wife that she was provided with a house and should incommode them no longer than till everything were ready for inhabiting it. Incommode is like trouble. She would trouble them no longer. They heard her with surprise. Mrs. John Dashwood, Fanny, said nothing, but her husband civilly hoped that she would not be settled far from Norland. She had great satisfaction, she being Mrs. Dashwood, in replying that she was going to Devonshire, which, as we know, is very far away. Edward turned hastily towards her on hearing this, and in a voice of surprise and concern, which required no explanation to her, repeated, Devonshire? Are you indeed going there? So far from hence? And to what part of it? She explained the situation. It was within 4 miles northward of Exeter. That's one paragraph. It's freaking cinema. That's so good. The whole thing makes me giggle. It is but a cottage, she continued, but I hope to see many of my friends in it. A room or two a room or two can easily be added, and if my friends find no difficulty in traveling so far to see me, I am sure I will find none in accommodating them. She concluded with a very kind invitation to Mr. and Mrs. John Dashwood to visit her at Barton, and to Edward she gave one with still greater affection. Though her late conversation with her daughter-in-law had made her resolve on remaining at Norland no longer than was unavoidable, it had not produced the smallest effect on her in that point to which it Okay, this is one of those sentences. Though her late conversation with her daughter-in-law, Fanny, had made her resolve on remaining at Norland Park no longer than was unavoidable, it had not produced the smallest effect on her in that point to which it principally tended. To separate Edward and Elinor was as far from being her object as ever, and she wished to show Mrs. John Dashwood by this pointed invitation to her brother how totally she disregarded her disapprobation of the match. So she very pointedly invites Edward with more affection than Fanny and Mr. Dashwood. And by doing that, she's hoping to piss Fanny off, which is hilarious. Mr. John Dashwood told his mother again and again how exceedingly sorry he was that she had taken a house at such a distance from Norland as to prevent his being of any service to her in removing her furniture. Remember when Mr. John Dashwood promised his father, Mrs. Dashwood's husband and the girl's dad, that he would provide for them and take care of them? And then Fanny convinced him to dwindle it down to just taking care of moving their furniture and doing them a favor instead of actually doing or giving them anything. Now he's like, "You're moving so far away. I'm so sorry that I can't help you move your furniture." They are the worst. They're the worst. They're the worst. He really felt conscientiously vexed on the occasion, for the very exertion to which he had limited the performance of his promise to his father was by this arrangement rendered impracticable or impossible. The furniture was all sent round by water. It chiefly consisted of household linen, plate, china, and books, with a handsome pianoforte of Marianne's. Mrs. John Dashwood saw the packages depart with a sigh. She could not help feeling it hard that as Mrs. Dashwood's income would be so trifling in comparison with their own, she should have any handsome article of furniture. So Fanny's like, why do they deserve anything pretty? Because they don't have any money. Mrs. Dashwood took the house for a 12-month or a year. It was ready furnished, and she might have immediate possession. No difficulty arose on either side in the agreement, and she waited only for the disposal of her effects at Norland and to determine her future household before she set off for the West. And this, as she was exceedingly rapid in the performance of everything that interested her, was soon done. She's so mean. The horses which were left her by her husband had been sold soon after his death, and an opportunity now offering of disposing of her carriage, she agreed to sell that likewise at the earnest advice of her eldest daughter. For the comfort of her children, had she consulted only her own wishes, she would have kept it, but the discretion of Elinor prevailed. Her wisdom too limited the number of their servants to 3, 2 maids and a man, with whom they were speedily provided from amongst those who had formed their establishment at Norland. So again, Elinor holding down the fort. The man and one of the maids were sent off immediately into Devonshire to prepare the house for their mistress's arrival, for as Lady Middleton was entirely unknown to Mrs. Dashwood, she preferred going directly to the cottage to being visitor at Barton Park. Lady Middleton is Sir John's wife, and Mrs. Dashwood's like, I feel like she's kind of like, I want to get my bearings before I meet her, so she wants to go straight to the cottage instead of the main house. And she relied so undoubtingly on Sir John's description of the house as to feel no curiosity to examine it herself till she entered it as her own. I just had to stretch there for a second. Her eagerness to be gone from Norland was preserved from diminution by the evident satisfaction of her daughter-in-law in the prospect of her removal, a satisfaction which was but feebly attempted to be concealed under a cold invitation to her to defer her departure. Fanny's like, don't go. Now was the time when her son-in-law's promise to his father might with particular propriety be fulfilled. Since he had neglected to do it on first coming to the estate, their quitting his house might be looked on as the most suitable period for its accomplishment. This is Mrs. Dashwood thinking this. But Mrs. Dashwood began shortly to give over every hope of the kind, and to be convinced, from the general drift of his discourse, that his assistance extended no farther than their maintenance for 6 months at Norland. She's like, oh, now would be the perfect time for him to say how he's going to provide for us or care for us or give us the thing that he promised my husband that he would, because I know he said that because my husband told me that he was going to do that. But Mr. Dashwood is distancing himself so much that she's like really giving up hope that they're going to get anything from him at all. And she's like, oh, is the thing that you were going to do for us just letting us stay in our home for 6 months? He, Mr. Dashwood, so frequently talked of the increasing expenses of housekeeping and of the perpetual demands upon his purse which a man of any consequence in the world was beyond calculation exposed to, that he seemed rather to stand in need of more money himself than to have any design of giving money away. In a very few weeks from the day which brought Sir John Middleton's first letter to Norland, everything was so far settled in their future abode as to enable Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters to begin their journey. Many were the tears shed by them in their last adieus to a place so much beloved. Dear, dear Norland, said Marianne, as she wandered alone before the house on the last evening of their being there, when shall I cease to regret you? When learn to feel a home elsewhere? Oh, happy house! Could you know what I suffer in now viewing you from this spot, from whence perhaps I may view you no more? And you, ye well-known trees, but you will continue the same. No leaf will decay because we are removed, nor any branch become motionless, although we can observe you no longer. No, you will continue the same, unconscious of the pleasure or the regret you occasion, and insensible of any change in those who walk under your shade, but who will remain to enjoy you. Clearly, Marianne knows or feels that the new Dashwood residents are not going to appreciate the house or the nature around the house the way that she does. I love her. She's so drama. That is the end of chapter 5. So we're closing loops at Norland Park. We are leaving. We're leaving behind this beloved home and moving on to a different place. But they're kind of, or they are ready to get away from Fanny and Mr. Dashwood. And I don't blame them. What are your feelings on Mr. Dashwood and his lack of integrity and his lack of fulfilling the promise that he made to his father, and therefore the promise he made to the women in his life besides his wife? Because the thing that I think I mentioned in a video before is that Mrs. Dashwood is really not in any place to say something to him about it. That's not her place. She can't. It's not proper. It's not even a thought in her mind. That paragraph that we went over where she's like, "Oh my god, like now would be the time for him to do something," but he's talking so much about his expenses and he can't give money away. That would have been the time for her to even think and have the thought to ask him or to bring it up. It's not her place at all. It doesn't even occur to her. So it's like incredibly frustrating. The women at this time, the amount of suppression of their feelings and their own thoughts and their own opinion, the amount that they had to not say. I'm not sure. I'm sure it was frustrating, but I'm not sure, given how I know it is to be a woman in the world now, where we at least can usually speak our mind and express our feelings. I can't. Did it even occur to them how much they were being squashed down? Or do you think that they were just like, this is the way it is, and they learned to maneuver around it? I'm sure that there were some women who saw the incredible injustice and unfairness in it, but I'm sure that there were a lot of women that fully accepted it and was just like, this is the way it is. And then I'm sure that there were some women who were like, this makes me feel not good. I don't really love this, but I don't really know what to do about it either. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on chapter 5. Let's move on to chapter 6. The first part of their journey was performed in too melancholy a disposition to be otherwise than tedious and unpleasant. But as they drew toward the end of it, their interest in the appearance of a country which they were to inhabit overcame their dejection, and a view of Barton Valley as they entered it gave them cheerfulness. Lot of emotions on this carriage ride, you know? I really can't imagine leaving a beloved home to go somewhere you've never seen before. The sadness of leaving that home, of leaving that life, of leaving your dad behind. Of course, the carriage ride is miserable. And then as they get closer, it's like, okay, but this is kind of exciting. We're going to see things we've never seen. We're going to have a new home that we can make our own. And at least we're away from Fanny. It was a pleasant, fertile spot, well wooded and rich in pasture. After winding along it for more than a mile, they reached their own house. A small green court was the whole of its demesne, Demesne. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I did look it up yesterday and I already forget, but it means land or territory. So the whole of its land in front, and a neat wicket gate admitted them into it. As a house, Barton Cottage, though small, was comfortable and compact. But as a cottage, it was defective, for the building was regular, the roof was tiled, the window shutters were not painted green, nor were the walls covered with honeysuckles. A narrow passage led directly through the house into the garden behind. On each side of the entrance was a sitting room about 16 feet square, and beyond them were the offices and the stairs. 4 bedrooms and 2 garrets formed the rest of the house. It had not been built many years, and it was in good repair. In comparison of Norland, it was poor and small indeed, but the tears which recollection called forth as they entered the house were soon dried away. They were cheered by the joy of the servants on their arrival, and each for the sake of the others resolved to appear happy. They're sad seeing the house, although it sounds lovely. And I do have a little note here. Is this an idea of what a cottage should be from the Dashwood perspective? So they're like, where's the honeysuckle? Where are the green cottages? I think this really paints a picture that these women really have only known one place, one home. They have not traveled a lot. They have not seen many cottages. They're very sheltered. It was very early in September. The season was fine, and from first seeing the place under the advantage of good weather, they received an impression in its favor, which was of material service in recommending it to their lasting approval. I feel like we should count how many times we hear the word approbation in this book. The situation of the house was good, so the placement of the house was good. High hills rose immediately behind and at no great distance on each side, some of which were open downs, the others cultivated and woody. The village of Barton was chiefly on one of those hills and formed a pleasant view from the cottage windows. The prospect in front was more extensive. It commanded the whole of the valley and reached into the country beyond. The hills which surrounded the cottage terminated the valley in that direction. Under another name and in another course, it branched out again between two of the steepest of them. I love getting such a clear description of the home and the land. And also, if you've seen the 1995 film adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, the place that they found is very accurate, I feel, to this description, especially when they say when you walk through the front door, there's a hall directly to the back to the garden, and on either side are 2 sitting rooms. That's exactly the set that is used for the cottage, or feels like pretty exact to the set that they used for the cottage in the film, which is great. Was a fun little nugget while I was reading this for the first time to realize. With the size and furniture of the house, Mrs. Dashwood was upon the whole well satisfied. For though her former style of life rendered many additions to the latter indispensable or essential, yet to add and improve was a delight to her, and she had at this time ready money enough to supply all that was wanted of greater elegance to the apartments. As for the house itself, to be sure, she said, it is too small for our family, but we will make ourselves tolerably comfortable for the present, as it is too late in the year for improvements. Perhaps in the spring, if I have plenty of money, as I dare say I shall, she's still waiting on Mr. Dashwood, we may think about building. These parlors are both too small for such parties of our friends as I hope to see often collected here, and I have some thoughts of throwing the passage into one of them with perhaps a part of the other, and so leave the remainder of that other for an entrance. This, with the new drawing room, which may be easily added, and a bedchamber and garret above, will make it a very snug little cottage. I could wish the stairs were handsome, but one must not expect everything, though I suppose it would be no difficult matter to widen them. I shall see how much I am beforehand with the world in the spring, and we will plan our improvements accordingly. This is a big adjustment for them. Mrs. Dashwood has all these big dreams of how to improve the cottage and builds this and bump out that and widen the staircase and everything, because she's used to, I don't know, I'm exaggerating and not like almost indispensable funds. Like she was the lady of the house. She could do what she wanted. She was married to a man with money, and I guess it's not indispensable funds. Their home just already was what was needed. And now she's in this small cottage and it's not what she's used to. She can't host the parties she likes. And she's like, oh my God, I'll just fix it. She's like, I'll just make it bigger, because she's like, I'll have plenty of money, because she's still hoping on Mr. Dashwood helping them out. And she just is like, this is fate. This is great. This is fine. And I think that it's also helpful to her to have a project. I just don't know that by spring she'll be able to do it. But for right now, this is keeping her afloat. In the meantime, till all of these alterations could be made from the savings of an income of 500 a year by a woman who never saved in her life, they were wise enough to be contented with the house as it was. Okay, so Jane is is it's like, what's the word? She's being sarcastic, Jane Austen. She's like, oh my gosh, well, in the meantime, until the spring, this woman who has this little tiny amount of money coming in and who has never saved a day in her life, until, she gets the money she needs to make these improvements, they'll just have to be happy with it the way it is. So this is an example of Jane Austen's own narration, or just like a narration from some other figure. It's not coming from a character in the novel, it's someone else. And I assign it to Austen. I don't know if she intended it that way, but whenever there's like a sharp snap of a comment in there, it's usually coming from her. Like, it's usually coming from Austen. So they'll have to be happy with the house the way it is. And each of them was busy in arranging their particular concerns and endeavoring by placing around them their books and other possessions to form themselves a home. Marianne's pianoforte was unpacked and properly disposed of, and Elinor's drawings were affixed to the walls of their sitting room. So I had to look up the phrase disposed of. It just means that the pianoforte was arranged, but the way we use that phrase today means like basically getting rid of, and obviously that's not what they mean here. But so they're setting up shop. They're making this place their home by decorating and doing what they can with the things that they already have. In such employments as these, they were interrupted soon after breakfast the next day by the entrance of their landlord, Sir John Middleton, who called to welcome them to Barton and to offer them every accommodation from his own house and garden in which theirs might at present be deficient. Sir John Middleton was a good-looking man about 40. He had formerly visited at Stanhill, but it was too long ago for his young cousins to remember him. His countenance was thoroughly good-humored, and his manners were as friendly as the style of his letter. Their arrival seemed to afford him real satisfaction, and their comfort to be an object of real solicitude to him, or real concern to him. He said much of his earnest desire of their living in the most sociable terms with his family, and pressed them so cordially to dine at Barton Park every day till they were better settled at home, that though his entreaties were carried to a point of perseverance beyond civility, they could not give offense. So he's really pushing really hard, but he's so freaking nice that they're like not bothered that he's pushing. His kindness was not confined to words, for within an hour after he left them, a large basket full of garden stuff and fruit arrived from the park, which was followed before the end of the day by a present of game, or meat. He insisted, moreover, on conveying all their letters to and from the post for them, and would not be denied the satisfaction of sending them his newspaper every day. Excuse me, what a gem! What a gem! Oh, he sounds lovely. Lady Middleton, his wife, had sent a very civil message by him, denoting her intention of waiting on Mrs. Dashwood as soon as she could be assured that her visit would be no inconvenience. And as this message was answered by an invitation equally polite, her ladyship was introduced to them the next day. They were, of course, very anxious to see. Wait, let me pause. That's such an interesting thing. Where Sir John Middleton just shows up. He's like, oh my God, welcome. He's like, what can I do for you? Here, take this. We are so happy that you're here. And his wife like sent word with him where he was like, she'll come see you when she knows it's not inconvenient for you. And yet here he is like, hey, what's up? Like, it's just a funny dynamic there. Lady Middleton does come by. They were, of course, very anxious to see a person on whom so much of their comfort at Barton must depend, and the elegance of her appearance, her being Lady Middleton, was favorable to their wishes. Lady Middleton was not more than 6 or 7 and 20, so she's 26, 27. Sir John Middleton is 40. Her face was handsome, her figure tall and striking, and her address graceful. Her manners had all the elegance of which her husband's wanted, but they would have been improved by some share of his frankness and warmth. And her visit was long enough to detract something from their first admiration by showing that though perfectly well bred, she was reserved, cold, and had nothing to say for herself beyond the most commonplace inquiry or remark. She's very unlike her husband. And I like how Austen does this comparing of personality to paint a clearer picture of who each person is. So we have a clear picture of John Middleton, and then in order to describe his wife, she's like, Austen is like, oh, well, her manners were really, really great in all of the ways that her husband's could be, but she would have been improved by some of his warmth. And the longer they spent with her, the more like the flaws, if you will, of her personality popped up. Conversation, however, was not wanted, for Sir John was very chatty, and Lady Middleton had taken the wise precaution of bringing with her their eldest child, a fine little boy about 6 years old, by which means there was one subject always to be recurred to by the ladies in case of extremity or like awkwardness. For they had to inquire his name and age, admire his beauty, and ask him questions which his mother answered for him, while he hung about her and held down his head, to the great surprise of her ladyship, who wondered at his being so shy before company as he could make noise enough at home. On every formal visit, a child ought to be one of the party by way of provision for provision for discourse. I have something to say about this. In the present case, it took up 10 minutes to determine whether the boy were most like his father or mother, and in what particular he resembled either, for of course everybody differed, and everybody was astonished at each other's opinion. An opportunity was soon to be given to the Dashwoods of debating on the rest of the children, as Sir John would not leave the house without securing their promise of dining at the park the next day. So, this is like the most relatable thing, and I absolutely got a kick out of it. Anytime you go to like a family party or a gathering, we all joke today that like, oh my God, I hope there's a dog. Because then I can go to the corner and sit with the dog or talk about the dog or ask about the dog. It'll give me something to bring to the table, some common ground. And I know I feel that way about kids as well. And like if there's a kiddo at a party, I'm like, I want to say hi. I want to ask, how old are they? Oh my God, they're so cute. And Jane Austen is like, there should always be a kid at a party. Because they are like, they are a talking point just sitting there for you. It is a way to avoid, what did she call it? A child ought to be of the party by way of provision for discourse, so that there's something to talk about. It's so funny. It's so relatable. And the use of a child as a buffer in an awkward situation is so real. So Sir John Middleton and Lady Middleton do have more children. This 6-year-old was just the oldest, and made the whole encounter very pleasant, just by being there. But they do have more children, and the Dashwoods, the ladies, are excited to observe them and see which kid is more like mom, which kid is more like dad, and they're going to meet them soon because they've made plans for the next day. So this was chapter 6. So something that I wanted to comment on here is that we have barely seen, talked about, or heard from Margaret, the youngest sister of the Dashwoods. We have Elinor, Marianne, obviously the two main players here, but then Margaret is their younger sister, and we barely hear from her. And in the 1995 film adaptation, Margaret has a pretty prominent place. She is used as a tool. The character is used as a tool to, bond Elinor and Edward, to kind of break the ice, which is very similar to what we just talked about with having children at a party. I think it's really interesting. I wonder if Emma Thompson read this passage that we just read in chapter 6 and was like, I bet I could use Margaret as a tool in certain scenes to bring characters together, because that's essentially what is happening here with the Middleton kids, bringing the Middletons and the Dashwoods together, which I just found like a really interesting parallel. And I'm really curious if that's something that occurred to Emma Thompson as she was writing the screenplay for the 1995 film. I just also wanted to mention about the dynamic of bringing children into the picture in the way that they are brought in chapter 6 to bring the families together and help them relate to each other. It's such a human thing. It's such a little thing, like, of humanity that everyone can relate to, that it could easily be overlooked by an author. But Jane Austen was such an observer and what's the right word? Genius on humans. Like, it just feels like she was such a, I'm really losing adjectives. I'm really struggling with figuring out how to say this, but she was so sharp and so aware and observed people so well. And that has to be the only way and the only reason that she can write people so clearly as well. These characters are so clear. We don't even have dialogue from all of them yet. And yet I feel like we have a good handle on everyone. But bringing the kids into this and putting in this very, very relatable story, the only reason to do that would be to show that these characters are real, that she wants you to look at these people as people who are living. And she was writing these books at the time of the time. And I'm sure I would imagine people at that time were also having a moment where they were like, oh my God, that's so relatable. Like, that's the most relatable thing. And I just think that Austen kept it in there, or not kept it in there, but put it in there in the first place. It just speaks to who she is as an author. We could have had that scene without kiddos, or just saying that the kiddos are there and not touching on the fact that the interaction was made entirely more amiable and less awkward because they were there. They could talk about the kids. I just find it fascinating. I don't really know what I'm saying at this point, but I find it fascinating. We are 6 chapters in now. If you have not read Jane Austen before and you're reading her now for the first time, what is something about her writing that has surprised you? And if you've read her before, what is something new that's occurred to you about her writing? Because I know every time I read or reread her books, I find something new or have a new insight, or I'm like, I wonder if she was thinking this, So let me know what your thoughts are on that down below. Thank you for joining me for chapters 4 through 6 of Sense and Sensibility. I will see you in the next video where we do chapters 7, 8, and 9. Thank you. I'll see you next time. Bye.